Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas podcast, where I'm joined by a VFL early part of the 21st century, CJ Watson, former Tennessee star, and someone that had a backcourt mate in Chris Lofton, who kind of resembles a lot of what we're seeing with Tennessee basketball right now, with Sakai Ziegler and Chaz Lanier this season. But first, I got to say, CJ, this is my first guest who I played with in NBA 2K. I think you are the first guy I played with in NBA 2K on this very program. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, man. You're making me feel old. 21st century, the first guy you played 2K with, but it's definitely an honor to be on the show.
I mean, you're 40. Do you feel old? Like how like I'm turning 34 this year, so I'm closing in. I'm right there with you. I'm getting up there. Do you feel 40 at all when you play it?
I don't play anymore, but yeah, definitely. I just feel it when I wake up, but it's definitely a different feeling when you're 40, waking up, little aches and pains here and there. You can tell when it's getting cold outside because your knee starts to hurt a little bit, but all those little things your parents told you about, it's starting to come true.
So you don't hoop at all anymore? Like you're not
No.
even for fun, anything?
No, I can't play for fun. I'm too competitive to play for fun, and I can't just go out there and play, with just anybody. So I think I just gotta play against the best. So if I can't play against the best, then I just gotta just retire.
Do you still at least get shots up, or are you like nothing? What was the last time you took a jump shot?
I haven't touched a basketball in years, and it feels good.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you miss it? Do you miss it? Because it seems like a lot of players, they talk about like when their body gets to a certain point, they don't miss the grind, but they do miss the camaraderie and being in the locker room. Is that kind of how it was for you?
Yeah, I think when I first retired, I definitely thought I still had a little left in the tank, and I still missed it, and still thought I could, or wanted to play. But now it's just like, I still love the game. I watch it. I don't want to go out there and train, 5 or 6 hours out of the day, or go hit in the weight room and lift and do footwork, agility drills, stuff like that. So I definitely love it, but I don't miss it at all.
Are you somebody, when you have friends over, family over, and basketball's on, are you a awesome basketball hang where you're like, I can just watch it for what it is? Or are you looking at identifying stuff and look at it kind of as like a coach and a player? Can you look at it as a fan, or is it just too hard where you're just diagnosing stuff and it's just, I see the game differently and it's tough?
Yeah, I mean, I can sit and watch with other people, but sometimes people annoy me because they say things that just don't regulate with my basketball mind, I feel like. So, but I definitely dissect it and look at the game a different way than I think anyone else would, just a casual fan. But I can watch it with other people only for like a certain amount of time. If I watch it with you once and you annoy me, then if you ask me to come watch the game with you again, I'll probably just make up some excuse why I can't go.
What's the biggest pet peeve from what fans see and complain about versus what you see and you're like, man, you still know ball?
I mean, just the people suck, which I mean, people do suck, right? But it's just like but just the grind that the people put in. Like, obviously, they're in the NBA or whatever college for a reason, but I think they're like, oh yeah, I can do better than that. He should have made that shot. Well, obviously, he didn't make it, but yeah, I think that's just my biggest pet peeve.
I love that. One of the things that's so interesting, like I think you're one of those, you and Chris both are just kind of guys when you came along, you're just you would have had so much success in this modern era of basketball. And I wonder, from your vantage point, CJ, do you think about that a lot, where you're like, man, this would have been a lot more fun, no hand checking and just so much space and 5-out basketball, and just there's just a lot of threes, and it's not even really chucking, it's just how offenses are constructed now to come off pin downs and take so many corner threes are such a big shot now. Like, is that something you think about a lot, of just, man, this would have been a lot of fun for me to play in my prime?
Honestly, not really. I mean, I think everything happens for a reason. I play, in the era that I played in, and that's how God wanted it to happen. I think the biggest thing, and my friends and always talk about, is like the NIL stuff. Like, CJ, how much money you think you would have wanted from someone? I'm like, I don't know. It didn't happen, so it doesn't matter. But I think it all happens for a reason, and I got to play the game that I love for basketball. I got to get an education. I got to travel the world. So I'm definitely grateful for it all.
Where was your favorite place you traveled to?
For basketball,
Mm-hmm.
I would say like China, Dominican Republic, Hawaii. I think probably like those places. Turkey, Israel, Greece, Italy. So
You've been all over, man.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit everywhere. Yeah.
Is there one bucket list spot that you haven't been that you're still itching to go to around the world?
Around the world. I would like to go to Japan one day. Heard it's really
Okay.
nice. So,
Why?
um, well, actually, I've been to Africa too, so that was like a bucket list too. So that's one of my favorite places. But Japan, I just heard it's like super clean,
Mm,
good food, good shopping, stuff like that. So,
I love it. You were sixth in 3-point field goal percentage, 39%, nearly 40%, which was huge at the time, and tied for eighth in 3-point field goal attempts at UT. One of the things that I wonder about, like when you watch today's just offenses, how they're constructed, is it easier to get to that point, do you think, for modern guards, or do you think it's still basically the same in terms of getting threes up and just what goes into being a high level shooter in basketball?
I think it's tougher now because everyone switches everything. So
Hmm.
you don't have as many open looks as you would, back in the day where they're not switching pin downs, they're not switching staggered screens, stuff like that. So I think it's tougher now. But if you can get a three up, and knock it down, I think the biggest thing with even college and NBA, that it's a new era of shooting threes and driving to the basket. But everyone just shoots now. I feel like back in the day, people were only shooting if you had that a certain percentage, or you put
Hmm.
the work in, stuff like that. So this, I think you got to take smart threes and not just shoot threes just to shoot
Do you think by and large most people
them.
and most teams are doing that, or do you think because that just seems like a common national complaint from fans is that they're chucking. But if you watch game in game out, I mean, like you said, it doesn't seem to me that it's really chucking. It's just there are a lot of good looks. I mean, Tennessee, the last two games, like people are really frustrated with Chaz Lanier's shooting the last three games. I mean, he's he's getting good looks though. He's coming off pin
Yeah,
downs. They're good looks. Sometimes it's going to be streaky. Like sometimes you're just going to
yeah.
have a cold streak, but I mean they're good looks. And I think that's something that's missed from folks when they see the number of threes that guys are taking. But when so many of them are in the flow of the offense, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like chucking for a lot of guys.
Yeah, I think if you're taking good threes in the flow of the offensive shot that you usually work on and practice on, and coach wants you taking that shot, I
Mm.
think you can live and die with that. Obviously, you're gonna make and miss some shots. It's just about getting the reps in, having that confidence, and be able to knock it down. When the lights are on.
What's your favorite Tennessee hoops memory, CJ?
For me playing personally,
Hmm.
um, I would say when we went to Texas my senior year and beat Texas on the road, I think we smacked them too by like 20. And then we, obviously got ranked and stuff like that. So I think that was my biggest moment.
I love that. Was there a spot that you went to a lot? Were you a Gus's deli person? Was there a
uh,
go-to spot for you food wise in Knoxville?
I went to Gus's a few times, but mostly it was just like Gibbs Hall because it was free food
Yeah.
for the athletes. But I didn't really eat out much because we didn't have much money to eat out with.
So what did you do pregame meals that you were pretty set on? Were you pretty superstitious in terms of like your pregame prep and all that?
Yeah, our team would have like pregame meals and stuff like that. We always have like pasta, steak. I forget what's the restaurant on the river right there, Tennessee
Oh, Calhoun's.
Calhoun's. Yeah, we'd always have that catered for us. So we ate pretty good all the time. So it was never a reason to really go out unless you were like just super hungry after the game. And even after the game, we had meals and stuff like that. So
I like that. You're also a Bishop Gorman guy, CJ, and they're elite in all sports now. I mean, there's so many guys. I mean, Cedric Tillman just came in and out from Tennessee. They're obviously powerhouse in football, powerhouse in basketball. What was that like in Vegas, and what do you think goes into Bishop Gorman just being such a good place for folks to grow and develop and get to that next level?
they're also a powerhouse in women's volleyball. My daughter is a back-to-back state champion and
There you
back-to-back
go.
Gatorade Nevada Player of the Year. So I just had to give her a shameless plug.
I love that. Yeah.
But yeah, I think Gorman is just different. Just the way they approach things. They try to do things the right way, and they want to be elite, and I think they are elite, not just in sports but in also academics. So it's like I say, it's a private school. It costs to go there, but it's definitely a privilege to go there, and you got to wear with word on your chest, just like if I go to Tennessee, I'm going to wear that with pride too, and and rep it with pride too.
What kind of volleyball parent are you in the stands? Do you get active? Are you
No, I
like
just
it?
sit there because I know it's coming. I've seen my daughter. I've been in all my daughter's training sessions, practices,
Uh-huh.
so I know what she does, and I've trained her mentally, and just always coached her to do her best and have fun out there. I can't really say anything from the sidelines. You got to figure it out. So But we can talk about it, after the game or before the game. So you see me at a game, I'm just there, just making sure my kid gets home safe and not injured, hopefully.
I love that, man. Do you think, because with your Vegas background, CJ, do you think an NBA team will ultimately work? I mean, obviously you have Summer League there, and that's been kind of rumored forever that NBA team is probably on the way if you do expansion. Seattle and Vegas make a lot of sense here. I mean,
Yeah.
you've seen a lot of expansion in Vegas with pro sports. Do you think that's a good idea to invest in an NBA team in Vegas?
Yeah, for sure. I remember in high school when I was growing up that they always said sports would never come to Vegas. So to now
Mm,
have sports like football, hockey, women's basketball. I think we have like lacrosse here, soccer. So basketball is just and it's one of the greatest sports on the planet. So it's definitely coming. I know the city will support it, and it's going to do great here. I know.
Flipping back to basketball here for or Tennessee basketball, CJ, I'm curious, like, do you see a lot of Chris in Chaz's game or vice versa?
I think so. Yeah, I haven't honestly watched a lot of Tennessee basketball this year.
Mm,
But times I have watched them, they play similar. I think he's probably taller than Chris a little bit.
mm.
But just the way, I don't know if anyone shoots the ball better than Chris Lofton. So he's one of my favorite teammates and one of the best shooters I ever played with. So and I play with a lot of great shooters, and Chris is obviously undersized, but he can get his shot off anytime. And just over time, he worked on his handle. He worked on other things that people said he wasn't good at. So I always respect Chris for that.
What's the most underrated part of the Chris Lofton just rise to an All-American at Tennessee, like that you saw that other folks and fans didn't see?
I would just say personality wise, I think he just, fed into, being great and being one of the best players on that team and best players at Tennessee and then obviously in the country too. So for him to do that and just take that on and especially with all the stuff that he was going through with the cancer and stuff like that. So you don't see many people, fighting that battle and then also not never really talking about it because no one really knew about it. Even me as a teammate, I didn't know about it for a period of time. So he just puts his head down and works. Like I said, I always respect Chris for that.
How did he help you sharing the court? Because that's something that people talk about a lot. It's just like two super talented guards. I mean, you've seen going back House of Guards in DC with Beal and Wall, and I mean you did that in Indiana. You got it right
Mm,
behind you. You and George Hill.
yeah.
What is? I think a lot of people look at it as like, oh, how is this going to work with those two sharing the ball? But it does seem like it's kind of overthought about in a lot of ways, and that it like extremely talented guards figure out a way to make it work and play off one another. What is that kind of overblown when you think back to just people wondering about C.J. Watson and Chris Lofton, how it was going to coexist?
Yeah, I don't think we ever had that issue, honestly, because I was more of like a point guard. Obviously,
Mm,
I wanted to score more, but Chris was more of a shooter, came off pin downs and staggered screens, stuff like that. So it was easy to work with him. I think over time he got to uh, more work on more pick and roll in the pick and roll situation to handle the ball. So I think that's where his game kind of grew. And I think I said it was never an issue with me and Chris. I was just trying to figure out how I can get him the ball and get an assist because I know if I got it to him, it was most likely going in if I passed it to anybody else.
I love it. Do you think the game is because there's just like we talked about, there's just a lot of I think unfounded negativity about where basketball is going and where basketball is at the moment. When you watch college pro and even some amateur stuff at Bishop and things like that, do you think the game is in a positive place? Do you think it's still in a good place and that the threes and just the modern way of playing is good and healthy for the sport?
I think it's good. I think the only negative thing I would say about it, just as a former player, is I feel like everyone just plays the same.
Mm,
Everyone's four out, one in, or five out. Like back in the day, and we were just talking about some of this with my NBA teammates at Derrick Rose's celebration. Like
mm.
everyone plays the same way. Like back in the day, you knew San Antonio ran their stuff. Golden State would run and gun. You knew Boston was tough on defense. It was just everyone played a different style of basketball. So now it's just everyone plays the same ways, pick and rolls, try to get a switch and get a mismatch, which is cool and all, but it just feel like it just drains the game and just has everyone standing still and no movement. I'm a big ball movement guy, so I grew up on ball movement and just moving the ball, flow of the offense. So I think that's the only thing I would change about it if I had to change or pick one
How do you change it? Like, have you thought about that? Like, what can they do rule wise or development wise? How do you actually? Because there's some smart people who have like we've kind of solved basketball where it's just like
thing.
it's a math problem now. Like, I think it's hard to kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube because you're going to lose more if you try
Yeah.
and fix it. Like, you kind of need buy-in across the board. Like, I don't know if it's an easy fix.
Yeah, I don't know either. I just think continuing to develop. I think a lot of development, having everyone handle the ball, pick and rolls. Like when you see players like Wimby who can do pretty much everything, that's pretty special. And I think even for like guys from overseas is catching up with the USA if they haven't caught
Mhm.
up already. Just from the amount of talent that's in the NBA that's from overseas and how they're continuing to develop and be good at pretty much everything. So I definitely think you got to continue to develop and just practice teaching and preaching the game, the fundamentals of the game. I think.
Yeah, I think people look at like Anthony Edwards, who like leads the league in threes, and it's just I think that would not be the case. Like it's thinking about like Kobe. I don't think there was
Yeah,
ever a time where Kobe was going to lead the league in threes, and it's just different. Like the modern
yeah,
superstar, you got to get him up,
yeah,
and
yeah,
like he is one of the best players in the NBA, and I think if he came along in your era, I think he looks completely different in terms of
yeah,
how he attacks and how he plays. He's kind of like a throwback, but he also has adapted to the climate. Like he's like, I got to get threes up, and I'm a good shooter.
yeah,
He's not an elite shooter, but he's a good shooter, and
yeah,
he's just got to take those shots. So it's just he's like a really interesting player to me because I think he has done a really good job of adapting to the climate that he's in to be a max player. But
yeah.
I wonder if that's where he's most comfortable, or if it's just like this is what I got to do.
Yeah, I think it's just taking advantage of opportunities, and he's grown up in a different era. So I think definitely think my whole thing is just getting up good shots. Don't take
Yeah.
any bad threes or just settle just because you can take a three and because you're the big guy on the team. So just let's have respect for our teammates and then just play the basketball the right way. You treat the game good, the game will treat you back.
Who is your favorite team to play with professionally?
I mean, I would say all of them,
Yeah.
but with the Bulls, I would say the best because we had a great team. We were winning best record in the league, and we
Mhm.
just ran into a guy named LeBron, and it kind of haunted us.
It's a lot of folks, man. A lot of
Yeah,
people
yeah,
ran into LeBron. It's like the
right.
Brady and Manning stuff. It's just,
Yeah,
it is what it is. The West was dealing that with Steph
yeah.
for the last decade too. So it's just the nature of the beast. Final thing here for you. Would you, when you, I know you're not as locked in on just Tennessee right now, but Barnes has been here for 10 years. You talk about like the Thibs era in Chicago. It seems like you would have really, really loved to play for Barnes, and there would have been a match personality wise. What do you think makes Barnes a really good coach, and why he works in this era, and why you think that might have been a good fit for you too?
I think he's just able to adapt to the modern, basketball player and relate to him. Like I said, he's had great players like Kevin Durant,
Mm,
and some great players at Tennessee. So he's able to adapt and change his style. I think the only thing I have a knock on Tennessee is that we can't really score that well. Our defense
mm.
is great, but can't really score at times. So I think that's just the only knock on us. But other than that, I love Coach Barnes. I've had some conversations with him. I text him here and there after big games and stuff like that. So definitely, a fan of his, and always, root for him in Tennessee.
I love it. CJ, what can the good folks check out from you all across the internet? How do they support all things CJ Watson here?
You can go to my Instagram and Twitter, quietstorm_32. I have some children's books that I wrote, cjpens.com, and have a foundation for kids, quietstormfoundation.org. So check them out.
I love it. CJ, thank you so much for the time. I greatly appreciate it. Good luck with everything in the future. And I'd love to, maybe check back in again one day soon.
Yeah, for sure. Tournament time.
Oh, I'm ready. I'm ready. Thanks, CJ.
Appreciate it.
All right, hello, welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Joining me, founder, publisher, dogcentral.com, Graham Coffey, longtime friend and friend of the program, and friend of Tennessee football that many forget. Graham, how are you?
I am a friend of Tennessee football. I want that known on the record. Thank you for pointing that out.
Many forget.
Yeah, people are saying, but many forget. So, I'm good, man. I'm good. Trying to stay plugged into the portal world, and everyone in Georgia land seems to be on Mike Bobo watch these days. In addition,
are you on Mike Bobo watch?
I'm curious. I'm on not Mike Bobo watch specifically, but I am on staff watch for Georgia in general. We've never seen Kirby go a whole offseason without making some staff changes.
Yeah.
there are some analysts and stuff that I definitely expect to move on as well, which I know that's not as sexy as coordinator hires, but those guys do have an outsized influence on building out scheme and philosophy. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I'm watching a lot of things. I would say, Bobo and what will happen there is one of the things I'm watching, but I'm not predicting anything necessarily.
Interesting. I thought that there was more venom towards Stacey Searles of late, just with how the offensive line was. There's more.
Just depends on who you ask and when. Definitely, there is definitely some venom there for all parties involved. But I think it's a chicken egg conversation, of course, right?
Yeah.
Which all of these are, if we're being honest with ourselves. I know that people in our line of work, we like to speak in certainty and, act like we're very convicted, but does the offensive line suck and not suck? They don't suck, but is the offensive line 15th in rushing in the SEC because bad play design and predictable play calling and, things like Greg McElroy being able to draw up your 4th and 2 call in the Sugar Bowl on the telestrator before it happens, or does is it in reverse? And a lot of these problems are because the offensive line isn't playing up to probably maybe the potential of the talent in the room. Is it injuries? Is it the fact that you came into the season for the first time in forever being like, we've got 2 studly X receivers that we can line up on the outside and throw balls to in the red zone, and it'll be the answer. And both those young men ran into different off-field domestic issues. Like, all those things are a factor, and I think that if you're being fair to Mike Bobo, you're taking all of that into account, and you are saying, like, this wasn't part of the plan. But I also would be lying if I sat here and said I think that Georgia got the most production they could have out of the offensive talent that they did have, and I do think there were times where Georgia was very predictable formationally in terms of whether it was going to be run or pass, and that ended up coming back to bite them in the Sugar Bowl, where you had some looks that Notre Dame and Al Golden, their defensive coordinator, knew, like, this is a pass look and this is a run look. And in a game like that, if you can sell out and create a havoc play that results in a turnover or 2, that's probably going to swing the football game. And it did in that case, I think, in many ways.
It's funny. I mean, you like everything. I don't know if you agree with this, but this is something I'm writing about tomorrow, is like how I know the try to keep the throw up to a minimum here, Graham, but I'm about to compare the state of the Georgia offense and the Tennessee offense. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of crossover right now. I think both programs would have preferred to have Trevor Etienne and Dylan Sampson back for another year because they have some talent behind them, but it's kind of like a gap year in a lot of ways where we would have been nice to have one more year of these NFL backs and just kind of ease things in because you like a lot of the options behind them, but it's going to be more of a rotation next year for both sides. And the sure thing, it's pretty nice when you because I think Etienne and Sampson were the best players on their respective offenses this past year.
For sure.
You have questions about the young quarterback. You have some optimism at both spots. Like, I think there are some Georgia fans who still like Gunner, and I think there are some that still like Nico. And there's going to be detractors on both sides. I think on both camps, I think it's going to be a little bit divided. The offensive line was not producing the way both thought it should have produced this past year, and that was an underrated part of where their problems were. You talk about predictability. I think that was kind of something you saw in the Ohio State game and in big matchups. Like, Heupel, the biggest thing he has to do this offseason, I think, is just get more versatile and get that unpredictability and add more of that stuff that we saw in 21 and 22, or find a way to do other things, whether it's Boo Carter on offense, more motion, pre-snap stuff, like that predictability part of it. Now that you've been in the league for 4 years, they've got a lot of tape of the Heupel offense now.
Right.
That I think it's a humongous offseason for him going into year 5. And then the receiver stuff, where I think both staffs saw that, like, this can't happen again. I think both staffs saw the pressure, and like you saw an exodus at receiver at Tennessee this offseason with guys but they went down a level in a lot of cases. I mean, Caleb Webb went to Wake Forest, but he ended up at Maryland now, and Chaz Nimrod's at USF, Lee Cox at Purdue. These are guys that moved around. Like there's a youth movement. They were able to retain Mike Matthews, which is a big win. But Georgia did the same. Like they bring in 5 freshmen. One's a 5-star receiver, and then they don't mess around in the portal. Where Tennessee was trying to get in on the Zachariah Branch sweepstakes, but Georgia wins there. Noah Thomas on the outside, like Colby Young could still be back. Like I think both sides saw that like the receiver stuff has gotta, like we can't do that again for another year. We have to get a whole lot more out of our receivers. But I don't know. I just think there's a lot of crossover between both offenses and where both programs are offensively going into 25. Because I think both sides, both fan bases are just as frustrated with what we saw in 24.
Yeah, they are. I mean, well, I can't speak for Tennessee fans other than, reading Twitter, which sometimes is an actual very accurate cross-section of a fan base, but in other words, it's not. Tennessee Twitter culture, I think, or internet culture in general is one of the more fascinating around, really. And I don't mean that. I don't mean that in a bad way, honestly. I find, the passion is more than admirable, truthfully. But yeah, I do think for Georgia, when you talk about the receiving thing, like they led the nation in drop passes. And you can talk about some other things that like you can talk about separation issues, which there were. And I think, but again, it's like it is all summed up by saying they led the nation in drop passes. Cause like, well, why did they drop so many passes? Sometimes they were wide open, but there was a lot of times where, guys drop passes because they weren't getting themselves that far into space and they're hesitant about getting hit. And, I thought there were things that Georgia could have done with its wide receivers that maybe would have helped them and helped the quarterbacks, whether that's Carson Beck or Gunnar Stockton. Dominic Lovett, it's like there were a lot of times where it felt like he was attached to the line of scrimmage, almost like, okay, it's second down, so Dom Lovett is going to run a drag route here. And it's like, well, when he was at Missouri, I saw him catching, lining up at Z and catching 40-yard contested balls to put them in position to kick a game-winning field goal against Auburn one Saturday. Like he was doing those kind of things and was very good at creating yards after the catch. The further downfield he was getting the ball. So, hindsight's always 20/20, and like I think people around the Georgia team or people, Georgia fans were like, why don't they play some of these young guys? And then they put young guys into the game and like they'd have a shot play drawn up for them. And it's like, bro, you just got like your second target of the season and you just tried to one-hand that bitch. Like, what are we talking about here? You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of that kind of stuff where you're like, well, that's why they don't play, man.
Yeah.
I do think they have flipped that room. Like, say what you want about James Coley. I know that that's a touchy subject for a lot of Georgia fans because really of his time as an offensive coordinator, but that guy can flip a position room and he's done it bringing in five freshman receivers. Are all of them going to be studs? Are all of them going to be at Georgia for 3 or 4 years? No, but like CJ Wiley is the type of big physical boundary receiver they've not had in a long time. Talon Taylor is the first 5-star receiver they have signed in, 5-6 years. So those two things on their own are a lot to be excited about. And then like you do have a guy in there who's a 4-3 guy and can kind of, whether he's a 8 to 10 snap a game gadget player that you just draw up shot plays for, or he's a really like full, well-rounded Lad McConkey style receiver. I don't know, but either way, there's value in having some speed there. So it'll be interesting. There were guys like Anthony Evans and others in that room this year who I think you kind of just like kept waiting on to step up and do something explosive and assert themselves. Even like London Humphreys, who came in from Vanderbilt, made like a big play in that Georgia Tech game to score a touchdown in overtime. And like he would have those flashes. First game of the season against Clemson, he's got a long touchdown catch, but the consistency just never was there. And those guys could never really like earn more than, those sort of rotational style snaps, despite the fact that the guys in front of them were dropping passes and doing all the things we talked about. So it'll be interesting. It'll definitely be different for them this year. I think the question, honestly, is like now you've got those receivers in the room, but you lose the middle three of your offensive line. And, Gunner, I thought, played better in the Sugar Bowl than I ever expected him to, if I'm being 100% honest. I didn't think he played poorly, but he made some throws that were like, wow, throws to me. But, it's a one-game sample set. Like, do they try to upgrade the talent there more? It certainly seems like they're trying to, but like, will they, I guess is the question. And then I think, who's protecting that quarterback in the end, because I do think Georgia sold Branch and Thomas on coming to Athens with the understanding of like, hey, we are going to get a stud quarterback to throw to you, whether that is Gunnar Stockton or somebody else. But like, we are going to make sure that, you're not catching off-target balls and, struggling and getting open and being missed, right? So how that plays out will probably be the biggest plot line of Georgia's offseason.
Interesting. In terms of the Tennessee aspect, because we talked before in our preview with our TPL event, and we haven't reconnected since. And it's one of my favorite just yearly check-ins, because this is something that I think a lot of Tennessee fans are like, this is the final thing Heupel has to get over. And it's tough. Like, it's really hard to get over the Kirby hump. But when I look at it, and this year felt a little bit different. It felt like it felt like Tennessee they haven't closed the gap, but they were closer than they've been in any of the four. And I understand they got shut out in the second half again, but defensively, to me, I think they're pretty close. I think Tennessee is now at a point defensively where they're going to hang with Georgia. And Tim Banks coming back, I think is quietly a big deal for Tennessee. Rodney Gardner obviously doing a really good job. I mean, they're not getting home enough against Carson, 40 dropbacks, not hit. Like, that can't happen again. But I think Tennessee is pretty close. I mean, they're only going to have blue chippers at linebacker this year. I think that will help in the middle of the field. You're not going to have a walk-on safety. I mean, Will Brooks was good in moments, but that was somebody Georgia picked on a lot in that game. Like, I think you're going to be more athletic and you're going to be better there. Boo Carter will be a year older. The corners, best Tennessee corner tandem in 25 years. So I think that helps. But that to me is still where I'm like, okay, Tennessee is caught up a little bit with Georgia's offensive talent versus Tennessee's defensive talent. I think it's pretty close. But to me, it's still the offense that I don't know. Nico showed a lot of heart in that game. He ran the ball well. And we talked about it before the year.
Did. And I was very impressed with his like competitive character, for lack of a better term. Sorry to interrupt.
No, but I mean, now I guess from your vantage point and what you saw as an X's and O's guy, Graham, how has Heupel changed a little bit? Because now he's got 4 times he's played Kirby Smart's defense, and I mean, I know he's going into it like, here's what I saw last year. How do I fix this? How do I attack Kirby's defense in a different way? Did you see anything this year that looked different in the way Tennessee's offense went at Georgia?
I mean, yes, but I think those differences, if I'm being honest, were kind of a product of like some of the limitations of this Tennessee offense. Like, I think they were, sort of like, you saw more 2 tight end sets from Tennessee this year and like more kind of physical smash mouth stuff. And they've always run the ball. Like, they've always been committed to run the ball under Heupel. And I think that's a misnomer that gets thrown around a lot sometimes. Like, you did see Tennessee run into some heavy boxes, which is not historically been the Heupel way. But it's like, I think they were willing and, maybe sort of had to run into some of those heavy boxes because of the limitations that they had at wide receiver, and some of the issues that I think Nico had in terms of like being a strong intermediate passer, and like the ball gets there quick when he throws to the boundaries, right? But it felt like he doesn't really see that middle of the field yet, and like see those layered throws that you're dropping between linebackers and secondary guys. It's like it feels like it's either I'm going to throw like a 12-yard comeback to the boundary, which not everyone can do. Like he has an NFL arm in terms of the talent and the strength. But yeah, you don't really see like that kind of more nuanced style to his game where he's seeing the field in a three-dimensional way and using loft and trajectory to like create more holes in a defense. Like all the holes that exist in the defense, I think from Nico's perspective are, he's throwing bullets, right? Unless he's chucking it deep. So I think Josh was probably limited in how he could attack defenses with Nico, especially a defense with Georgia that admittedly was not as good as it has been in years past, but like still has dudes, who will make you pay if you make mistakes. And so I think that's the question for me, honestly, with Heupel moving forward is what's the solve, man? Like it doesn't have to be one thing or the other necessarily. And I think a lot of it is going to be dictated by personnel, but like you see Tennessee get into these games against higher level defenses. I wouldn't even call them elite defenses at this point because I don't think Georgia was an elite defense this year. They weren't. I think they were a very good defense, but they were not, a top 10 defense in the sport in really any statistical measure. And the same thing happening against Ohio State. And oddly, I mean, the same thing happening against Arkansas, even though we know that wasn't an elite defense either. But like they get in new games and things are either working or they're not. And like when they're not, it's just like they just continue to kind of bang their head against the wall. And if it was just Nico in a 1-year sample set, I would say, well, that's probably the limitations of the quarterback they have and what they can run. But I do think at this point, like seeing that's been the case with Hendon and it's been the case with Milton and now it's been the case with Nico, is that more of a system issue or I don't know how big his playbook is, to be honest with you. Like I think the system is less about the play calls sometimes and more about the numbers and the tempo. But
I mean, the tempo was gone this year. Like the tempo was just completely, but part of it is like, if these guys don't, it takes all 11. Like the tempo can't happen if your offensive line, like when you have a transfer in Lance Hurd, who had a rough year coming in from LSU. If you have the receivers who are in it, like you need, and a young quarterback where you got to like, it requires so much. Like Hendon was able to run that tempo to an unbelievable degree. He's 24. Like Hendon was just like elite.
He was a pro quarterback in college. Yeah,
exactly. And I just think, would it surprise me if there's more tempo next year with Tennessee? But I think that helps to your point of like, I think this offense, it's tough, but I also think Heupel deserves credit for adapting because there's a lot of coaches that, Graham, in this sport that they're like, no, I'm going down with the ship. I don't care. This is my way. And he doesn't do that. Like this whole year, I'm certain Heupel hated this season offensively. Like it drove him nuts having to do 12 personnel as much as he did. But when you saw against Oklahoma, like he didn't have a choice. Like you have to go 12 personnel. We're going to sit on it and we're going to get away with a win here. But if your tackles can't block and your receivers aren't getting open, and when they do get open, they're dropping them, or Nico doesn't see him, or Nico's missing, it's like, what do you want him to do here? Like it's just, but his whole thing is like, I think Heupel is such a competitor that he will take the dubs over anything else. And I think there are some folks who won't do that. So I think now Heupel has kind of been a little bit undervalued and underappreciated in how he adapted to the circumstances this year.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I also think that, I credit him for, because the tempo thing, it might be hurt. It might be a young quarterback, but it also may just be a nod and a recognition to the fact that, like, the best unit on the field for Tennessee in 2024 was not its offense. Like,
yeah,
it was its defense, and that defensive line in particular was the strength of that unit. And, I think that, like, it's kind of a, hey, how do we keep those guys fresh? And they found good ways to do that. And I mean, like, dude, it's wild really to look back on that Georgia Tennessee game now, because what happened? Like, Georgia went on these long sustained drives in the second half, and they never really had much success running the ball from like a yards per carry standpoint, but they were just efficient enough to stay on schedule and not get behind the chains and deliver some body blows that I think finally kind of added up as they got into the fourth quarter and, had a touchdown lead and went on a drive. But
it was Oscar Delp and Yurcek. It was the tight ends. Like, that's where, like, in the middle of the field.
Guys
like,
disappeared again. Like, I came out of that game being like, okay, they finally figured it out. And they finally figured out if we run the offense through our tight ends, then we can make Carson comfortable. Because if you went back and looked at the 2023 tape, like, what was he comfortable doing? It's not just that he threw to Brock Bowers, but, like, that dude threw the ball up the seams as well as anybody. Never was really that great tossing the ball around outside the numbers. He was fine, but he wasn't, the NFL kind of throws that Carson made were all up the middle of the field. And so I just never understood why they didn't lean into that more in 2024. I thought, like, other than the all too predictable, like, here comes Dylan Bell on a slant on 3rd and 7. There was kind of a lack of some of those routes in the offense. And I think what they, if you gave Mike Bobo or the offensive staff truth serum and gave them that critique for me, they'd probably push back and say, did you see Carson throw, 3 interceptions in a row over the middle of the field against Texas? Did you, or 2 in a row and then a third out on the boundary? Like, he threw 3 in a row over the middle of the field against Florida too. I think, like, they had a particular problem where the midfield passing that they did do was to the wrong personnel, out of the wrong looks, with the wrong route combinations. And so I think they just kind of had this flawed thinking at times where it was like, well, that's not working over the middle of the field. We don't want to put the ball in danger and lose the game because we are -3 in the turnover column. So we're going to be real careful about throwing over the middle of the field. And, I think they kind of, by doing that, avoided some of the strengths of their offense and their quarterback. And I would have been very interested to see, like, what would have happened with them if they had just started running the offense through the tight ends. And I thought that's what they do with Gunner in the Sugar Bowl. I mean, like, I thought they'd say, hey, we're going to do a little, some zone read stuff and get them on the roll a little bit and have some of these tight ends leaking out on delays. And we're going to toss it to Lucky and Delp and Urasic, and we're going to let them go get some yards after the catch. And then we'll take our shots here and there and we'll control the football and win this game. And instead, they kind of ran the same offense that they had run with Carson Beck, which made very little sense to me.
Final thing, I'll get you out of here, Graham.
Yeah.
Georgia's playing Tennessee earlier next year. It's way too early, but a lot of the roster pretty much, I think, done. Like, there's going to be a little bit more portal movement on both sides, but
I think there'll be a lot more portal movement on Georgia's side. Just for the
a lot more. But what's a lot to you?
Well, I mean, I think there are some significant parts of 2025 Georgia that may not be currently on campus in Athens.
I'm going to say edge is somewhere.
One of them, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I still think they're going to get a quarterback in. And
interesting.
I still think it could be like a stud quarterback, or not a stud, but a starting quarterback. I'm
There's
not
a
sure.
reason they brought in Fernando Mendoza.
Yeah, they brought. I mean, there's a reason they brought him in on a somewhat secret visit, so Zachariah Branch would happen to bump into him in the hallway and realize they were serious about bringing in quarterback help.
With all that being said, though, I am curious now that you've had 4 years of seeing Heupel versus Kirby. It's in Knoxville. It's earlier. Tennessee keeps. It's going to be a youth movement at receiver. You'll have David Sanders at right tackle. Seems like he's going to be a day one starter there. I think the tackles should be better. Lance Hurd, former 5-star, second year in the system, should have a much better understanding of what's asked. No Sampson, but Nico, year 2. Is there part of you that thinks Tennessee could give Georgia the most amount of problems and difficulties that Georgia's had to this point? I mean, the quarterback question at Georgia, the offense as a whole question. Is there a reason for Tennessee fans to start looking at that game as like, maybe it's not a, like, hey, this is just, because I'm in the see it to believe it at this point with this series, but I don't know. I'm curious from your vantage point as we get out of here, Graham. Do you think it's something that will be better in 25 for Tennessee?
I think I'll frame it this way. I'm in the see it to believe it as well, just because I think that, like, you look at the offenses that score, 30 points on Kirby Smart teams, which there's a first round quarterback throwing to multiple first round wide receivers historically. I don't know that Nico's going to play like at that level in 2025. And I don't know that Tennessee's got a first 3-round wide receiver on their roster at the moment. Like Mag Matthews, maybe he becomes that, I think what Tennessee needs to develop to stress Georgia more is like some route combinations on the outside that can get Georgia's corners backs turned a little bit, and like, some things other than the slants and the go routes and sort of your kind of elementary route tree, like that feels like the thing they need to implement better. Now, the argument for Tennessee probably having a shot in that game, or not just a shot, but a chance to really stress Georgia, would be Malachi Starks is gone, who, did not play great at a lot of times this year, but like he's gone and you have to replace him. You don't have an obvious replacement. Same with Dan Jackson, who was probably Georgia's best secondary player in a lot of games. And then you kind of never figured out that star position in 2025 for like Aguero did some nice things, but like he doesn't look particularly comfortable in coverage once you get him outside of the first kind of 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. So who's going to play there? Heupel, more than any offensive coach that I know of at this moment in college football, or at least in the SEC, if he finds a matchup that he likes, he will hammer on that thing and hammer on that thing and hammer on that thing until you do something to change it. And there's a lot of like highly recruited talent in the secondary for Georgia right now, but a lot of it is unproven. And there's not really that obvious answer at like safety that there has been, like a KJ Bolden stepping into the program who's a 5-star. So there could be a duck in the secondary for Tennessee this year, like when they match up with Georgia, especially in week 3, like Kirby, he'll get exposed, or not him personally, but his defense will get kind of found out, or a matchup will get exploited early in the season. And then they go back and they sort of fix it and they change things, or they change personnel to keep that from happening again. You catch them that early in the schedule, you have a chance to be the one that exposes it and puts enough pressure on that point to maybe, create some real pain for Georgia. And like, if that's worth an explosive play for a touchdown or something like of that nature, then that could be the margin of error, So, yeah, I mean, Georgia right now has a lot of question marks. This is going to be a big transition year for them. You've kind of finally filtered out that 21-22 nucleus, and you got a lot of guys that, you know, they also kind of left, like that probably could have been significant players for them next year. I think some of them, you know, wanted to leave and were done playing college football. I think some of them, like, kind of probably just time for them to leave, honestly, culturally speaking. So it will be very interesting, and I don't know what it will look like, but I'm not counting anything as a guarantee for Georgia at this moment.
Kind of wild. I think both of us, to put a bow on it, are pretty both intrigued and also have just the least amount of certainty about how it's going to look in 2025 for both sides. But we both agree. I think it's a big year for both. I think there's some pressure there in different ways in both situations.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say too is, like, the irony on that a little bit from a Georgia standpoint, and this isn't what I'm predicting, to be clear, but, like, I do remember coming into the 2021 season for Georgia, like, the question was the defense. You know, like, it was like, oh, JT Daniels' offense, like, they're going to light it up. Go back and Google predictions for that 2021 Georgia-Clemson game. There were people predicting, like, a 38-35 game and 41, because, like, DJU was the chosen 5-star, and obviously it was a 10-3 football game.